Welcome to another edition of The Word on Woodward. I'm Daniela Bruce alongside Art Regner, and joining us today, NHL Draft and Prospect Analyst for the Hockey News, Tony Ferrari. And obviously, Tony's here to talk some NHL Draft with us. We are just under a month away from the big day, July 7th. So we're excited to talk to you, Tony. I know Red Wings fans are really starting to look into who the Red Wings might take with that 8th overall pick.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you because there's about 15 guys that they realistically could take because after the top few guys, it's wide open in this draft.
Tony, that's interesting that you would say that because I don't think I can ever remember a draft where maybe the top three we all know that probably in some order, even though Shane Wright now suddenly the definitive number one for the last decade, since the kid's been like 8 years old or something, that we've heard that, oh, he's number one. He's even sliding back and forth. But my point being, is this a direct product of what we're coming out of the pandemic and scouting and the way people that it's still a little bit of a hodgepodge when you look at these rankings?
Yeah, I think it is because I think the last few years we've looked at it and we're like, oh, these drafts are affected by the pandemic. And obviously they were 100%, especially last year with the OHL kids not playing at all. But I think this year is the one that's been affected most because they had their D-2 year kind of interrupted abruptly and then their entire offseason taken away by COVID. And then a lot of the kids either had interrupted seasons or no season last year, like Shane Wright, who played in the OHL, didn't have any games at all. So going into this year, he's coming off a year and a half of stagnant development. My hope is that hopefully these guys, especially a guy like Shane Wright, who showed so much talent and almost broke John Tavares' record for scoring as a 15-year-old in the OHL, I'm hoping that it's just a delayed year. They're going to be back next year and they're going to look just as good as we kind of always predicted. But at the end of the day, like this is a year and a half that all these kids kind of stagnated developmentally. So hopefully they can get back. But it's a weird year because so many of these guys have little tiny flaws, like right from the top five. It's going to be interesting to kind of see what teams value. And that's kind of where I think teams are going to go with their picks.
Tony, that's really interesting. And from what you've gathered, being able to talk to scouts, other reporters, or maybe even some front office members around the NHL, how are they handling that, not having that year and a half, or most prospects at least not having at least a year of that development?
They're kind of doing it the same way I'm doing it and the same way anybody else in the media is doing it. Every scout I've talked to is like, well, we just got to judge what we can see and what we've got on tape. And unfortunately, that means kind of ignoring their D-1 year. A lot of teams like to get at least a base level on a guy coming out of their draft year or coming into their draft year. And this year they didn't get like that with a lot of guys. And Shane Wright played 12 games at the U18s. Other guys played 12, 14, 15 games in their league, and then it was canceled or shut down early. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see how it goes. But the way I'm seeing it, the way I'm talking to teams and stuff, it's, hey, what do we value as a team? Is it skill? Is it size? Is it grit? Is it this, that, or the other thing? Is it skating? We got to lean into that and go with what you kind of do and trust yourselves in that way. And I think a team like Detroit, who's got so much scouting in Europe, they've done such a good job over there. They do a good job in the States as well. It's going to be interesting to see where they go because I wouldn't be shocked if they kind of avoid those leagues like the OHL, at least in the early rounds.
We've been to the draft and they all sit at the tables on the floor of the ice there, all 32 teams now. And when they all get together in the same room, odd and bizarre things seem to happen. Guys try to outdo each other or, they're making trades. Do you expect, and I know I'm asking you to be a bit of a soothsayer here, a real free-for-all on the floor in Montreal this year? Or do you think it's going to be kind of business as usual?
I think there's going to be an element of business as usual, but I also think because it's going to be the first year everyone gets back together after 2 drafts, everyone's going to be enjoying seeing each other. You're going to get the conversations. You're going to get conversations that you didn't have the last couple of years. So I won't be shocked if some teams get a little silly, but at the end of the day, I think teams are going to go, these boards are wide open. I have a player ranked at 5th and they have that team has a player ranked at 25th and they're the same guy. So it's going to be about who they value. And man, it's going to be wild because there's going to be a few names that go early on that everyone's going really. And then there's a few names that go late that everyone's going to go, wow, I can't believe they fell this far.
Could we see maybe a little bit more trading happening at the draft than we usually do?
At the end of the day, this draft is such a mystery because of all the missed development time and everything. So I could see a team like Detroit or even an Arizona getting wild at the draft and making a deal together, or some other team kind of jumping up and making that deal for a Chikrin or one of these other guys that have been kind of on the block for a little while. Like Jake DeBrusk, I could see being moved at the draft, even though he just signed an extension. it's going to be interesting because, like I said, some of these teams I don't think are valuing the draft picks this year as much as they would in normal years. So it's going to be a fun one.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask you again. We're going to assume the Red Wings keep that 8th pick for a minute here, and we're going to look at some of the prospects that are available. As you mentioned, there might be 2 or 3 guaranteed top picks, but other than that, it is super wide open. And everybody seems to have the Red Wings pegging a center at 8, just knowing that they need to add some depth at that position. And we've heard names like Carter Gauthier, Matt Savoy, Frank Nazar, even Connor Geekie I've seen thrown out there. Marco Kasper is another one. So there's a large group of centers that could be there at 8. And I'm assuming here that Logan Cooley and Shane Wright are obviously gone at that 8th pick. Who do you like out of that group? And is center where you see the Red Wings going?
I do think center is probably where they go. I think they look at their defensive group and they've got a loaded prospect pool. They've got Edvinsson coming in. Mort Seider is going to win a Norris in a couple of years, it seems like. So you're looking at the forward group, and while I think they have some, he's going to get votes. I think he's going to be a guy that gets votes. So it's going to happen soon. But no, I think center's probably where they go. Frank Nazar is a guy I've loved all year. He's a hometown kid. His dad grew up working at the parking garage of Joe Louis Arena, so he grew up a Red Wings fan. A guy like Matthew Savoy has got incredible skill. I think those two are the guys that you look at and you're like, if the Red Wings want to go for that upside, they want to really swing for the fences. Those are the two guys because they're both a little bit undersized, and some teams will shy away from that. But we've seen the Red Wings get bold, get crazy. I think everyone was a little shocked when Mort Seider was drafted, and now look at him. And I think everyone was even a little shocked with Lucas Raymond's pick. And it's going to be interesting to see where they go because those guys have that incredible upside. A guy like Marco Kasper is probably a little bit more of a safe pick. He doesn't necessarily have that top 6 upside. I think he's probably more of a third-line center at the end of the day. But you look at him and you go, he's kind of pro-ready almost already. So I think you could play him pretty early on. A guy that I think would be really interesting, though, is Brad Lambert. He'd be the ultimate swing for the fences, I think. A guy that has been up and down draft boards, started the year challenging Shane Wright as the first overall pick, and now he's kind of fallen down into the 15, 20 range, and now he's starting to get back up near the 10 range and stuff like that because he did have a better second half once he got to his new team. So it's going to be really interesting to see where they go because I think there's 4 or 5 centers that they could realistically go with.
Well, you know what I find interesting about that is that Matt Savoy is, and I had one guy explain it to me. He goes, how many teams in the NHL are coveting and really looking for a 5'9" center? How many? And I said, and he said, nobody. And so here's a guy who is rated really, really highly, top all year, top 5. And now he is just tumbling because he's 5'9". And I'm 5'9", so I love the guy. But with that said, do you think that we're seeing a move? You remember one year it was, you got to have big defensemen. We need these behemoths, the 6'4" guys, or taller. We just need big. Is now size an issue, or is Savoy being treated unfairly?
I think size is becoming less and less of an issue. I still think it's important. If you could have a guy like Matthew Savoy at 6'2", I think you'd take it, obviously. He'd probably competing for the first overall pick. But with Matthew Savoy, I look at him and all year long I go, man, I would love to see this guy continue at center at the next level because he's so good in space, and that's what he does. And I mean, we've seen Steve Yzerman draft a small center before that's been a pretty big member of a Stanley Cup champion in Braden Point. So could Matthew Savoy play that role for the Wings in the future? I think he certainly could because he's got the talent, he's got the skill. This kid, when he wants to be a game breaker, he absolutely can be. And on the biggest stages, he's always kind of showing up. So for me, Matthew Savoy is probably my first pick for the Red Wings there. The kids that got the obvious red flag is the height up. We all kind of know that. But if this kid works out, there's a real chance he could be the best player in this draft.
And the other forward that I had saw, he's a right winger, Jonathan Lekkerimäki, and he's Swedish. And that obviously, right away your ears go up when you're a Red Wings fan because it's like, here's this talented Swedish winger. And we know that the Red Wings scout really well in Sweden. I have seen him at 8 on a few different boards that I've looked at. Is that somebody that the Red Wings could go for, even though, like we said, we know they need that depth at center, but hey, he's said to be a sniper, so maybe they can't pass him up, right?
Yeah, he's a guy that's risen up the draft board all year. I think there's like 4 guys on that Djurgården team in Sweden that are all going to be drafted fairly highly in this draft. 3 of them forwards, and they all played on the same line for Sweden's U18 team. And Lekkerimäki's been the guy that kind of came out of nowhere, it seems. So he's a guy that, like you said, he's a sniper. He's real high-end trigger, man. I think he might be the best shooter in this draft overall, being a guy that can kind of shoot from anywhere and score from anywhere. And you envision him playing with a guy like Lucas Raymond and Dylan Larkin down the line, and you're like, oh, that could be a really lethal pairing, trio, because Dylan Larkin obviously has the crazy speed. Raymond's got that play driving ability, and you get an elite finisher on there. I love Bert, don't get me wrong, but if you can put that high end finisher that can truly be a first line winger that makes a difference and scores 30-40 goals as just a pure sniper, man, it would be a fun pairing to pair with those two.
Because it's such a wide open draft, they need a center. I can't see them not drafting a true center at 8. I really don't, because so many are available. But I do like Joakim Kemell.
Yeah.
There's something about him that he just seems to have, and for lack of a better term, because I am no draft expert, he seems to have an it factor. I mean, is he a possibility, or do you think he will be there at 8? Because he seems to be a guy that's climbing up too.
Yeah, he's a guy that I think he was in consideration at number 2, 3 early in the year because of his hot start in the Finnish pro leagues. At one point, he was leading the league in goals and everything. And in fairness, he was shooting just over 30%. So that's kind of unsustainable. And you saw it kind of regress in the second half. But much like Lekkerimaki, I think Joakim Kemell is a guy that's going to be able to come in, be that sniper, be on that top line, be on the second line, and really make a difference. And I think if you're considering Lekkerimaki, you got to consider Joakim Kemell too, because Joakim Kemell also brings a forechecking factor. He brings this energy in the offensive zone where he's also going to be able to get on the puck, retrieve it, get the puck back, and start setting up guys. I think he's a little bit of an underrated playmaker as well. I think the issue with him, kind of similar to Lekkerimaki as well, is once you kind of get out of that offensive zone, there's some question marks with the defensive play and whether or not they're engaged in that end. But we've seen a few times where when Kemell gets really going, he gets really hyped up, he'll lay a guy out, he'll throw a hit. He's a little bit undersized. I think at the combine, he actually measured in at 5'9.5", which was a little bit of a shock because all year he's been listed at 5'10" or 5'11". But this is a guy that I think he's got the energy, he's got the push. If you can pull something out of him and get him to kind of be a little bit more motivated defensively, I think he could be an excellent two-way winger with that elite finishing ability.
All right, now I'm going to ask you to do some major crystal ball. What did you call him, a soothsayer earlier?
Soothsayer, yes.
Yeah. And look at these middle rounds for the Red Wings too, because obviously that number 8 pick is really important. But again, they have 2 second-round picks, a third-round pick, and 3 fourth-round picks. So that second, third, and fourth round are going to be super important as well. And we know that Steve Yzerman has definitely drafted well in those rounds in his past as a general manager. Is there anybody that stands out to you in that range at all that the Red Wings could go for in those later rounds, or even maybe you don't think they're exactly going to go to the Red Wings, but some gems that everybody should have their eye on?
Yeah, I think a guy like Jagger Firkus is the first one that pops up in my mind. And I mean, he's got an elite hockey name, Jagger Firkus. It's great to just say, but this kid's got a ton of energy, a ton of like flair to his game. He loves to throw the windmill digs. He almost looks like a video game out there at times, and he impresses every time he gets on the ice, plays in the Moose Jaw in the WHL. He's got a ton of fire to his game and got that elite finishing ability. I think you could put him up on a top 2 lines and be a real difference maker there. But in the second, third rounds, I think there's going to be a lot of defensemen that fall, because there's a lot of defensemen in this draft in general, and a lot of question marks around a lot of the defensemen. There's a lot of guys where you're like, well, he's really good at A and B, but C, you got to really work on him with there.
Tony, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, we've all talked. I've already said they're going to go for a center, no matter what, at 8th overall. But if Nemitz or Jiricek drop, much like Simon Edvinsson. Simon Edvinsson was a no-brainer. When he was available at 6, I'm surprised Steve, didn't do cartwheels around his dining room table or wherever he made the pick from. But, I mean, that was really a no-brainer. If one of these high-end defensemen, and they are like the 2 standalone guys, supposedly, if you listen to everything, would Detroit just say, hey, let's throw caution to the wind. We need a center, but these 2 are too good to pass up, or one of the 2 if they do drop?
I think if Nemec drops, I think you still probably lean towards center, especially if there's a guy like Matthew Savoy there. But if Jiricek's there, I think that's a guy you look at and you're like, we can't really pass him up. He's a guy that you pair him with Edvinsson, Seider going forward. You get a couple guys like Wallander and Johansson kind of develop and work into this team. And you all of a sudden have this absolutely loaded back end that wins Stanley Cups. Like, we look at all the Stanley Cup champions and they have these loaded back ends, these high end defensemen who, through the first and third pairing, everyone's contributing, and that's exactly what you get with that. Putting a guy like Jiricek with Seider or with Edvinsson, you end up with a pairing that could not only stop teams defensively, but also completely bowl teams over offensively. So I think if Juracek falls, you consider it a lot because he's got so much upside, so much dynamism to his game. Nemec is a little bit more of a question mark. There's a little bit of questions with him because he does play in the Slovak Pro League, and there are some flaws in his game that I think need to be worked out. So you are a little bit more apt to go, you know what, we'll still take Savoy, or we'll still take whatever center you see there, whether it's Lambert or Nazar. But Juracek certainly is a guy that if he's fallen to 8, I think you're laughing and you're just dancing around the kitchen table, like you said.
What about Cutter Gauthier? So I've heard a lot about him too, and every time I look at a draft board, it seems like he's kind of all over the place. I've seen him as high as 3. I've seen him as low as 10, I believe, on people's draft boards. So where do you think he is going to go? And if he's someone that's available at 8, is he an option for the Red Wings?
I think he's going to be available at 8. I think he'd certainly be an option to talk about. I look at Cutter Gauthier and I go, I don't know if he's going to be a center at the next level. I know he said that's what he wants to play in college next year. I know he played a little bit, filled in for Logan Cooley when he went to the World Juniors and everything, but I look at him more of as a winger. He's a little bit more of a physical player, works really well along the boards, works inside or outside in a lot of times, and I think he's a really good player. I probably wouldn't have him as an option for the Wings at the end of the day, though, when I'm getting down to the nitty-gritty, especially if a guy like Nazar is there, or a guy like Savoy, or if Juracek falls. At the same time, there's been a lot of talk about Cutter Gauthier and where he's going to go, and I've heard NHL teams, like you said, talk about him in the top 5, and if they want to do that, they go for it. This isn't going to be a Tyler Boucher situation where a guy ends up getting drafted 60 spots higher than he needs to be, but I could see him get drafted 10 spots higher than where he should have been. And at the end of the day, he's going to be a really good player. I think he's going to be an NHLer for sure. I just think you're missing out on some upside if you end up taking him at 10 or at 8 instead of a guy like Nazar, Savoy, Juracek.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot for my last question here. And for everybody watching, Tony was not prepped for this question. So I'm just, see, this is his honest answer is what I'm saying. Who do you think is going to be behind the bench for the Red Wings next year? Do you have any coaching prospects in mind?
I don't know. It might be Art, honestly. It's going to be interesting because, there's a lot of options out there.
I've always thrown my head in the ring with Steve on everything for years now, and he knows I'm available.
Even an intern.
If I have to give one name, I'll give a name that's a little bit off the board, and it's a guy that I've wanted to see get an NHL shot for a few years now, and it's Rickard Gronberg, a Swedish coach. This guy's been successful at every level he's been at. He's a guy that deserves an NHL shot at this point. And I think the Red Wings, if any team is going to go a little bit off the board and go to Europe to get a coach, it makes a lot of sense that the Red Wings do it. I know he's friends with Nicholas Lidstrom and Nicholas Kronwall and everything. So I'm going to throw Rickard Gronberg's name there, but it's going to be crazy. There's so many guys interviewing right now with different teams, and it seems like a lot of vacancies this year.
Tony, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It's been great chatting with you. We're really looking forward to the draft. Like I said, a month away now.
Yeah, it's nice talking to you guys too. And hopefully next time we can do this in person.
Yes.
I like your shirt.
That's a comment.
Thank you.
Yeah, you look great. Thanks for dressing up.
I try.
Of course. A big thank you to everybody for tuning in to another edition of The Word on Woodward. We'll see you next time.